I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Today, you are going to learn what is the FPV Freedom Coalition. And I hope that since the FPV Freedom Coalition deals with, among other things, regulatory issues pertaining to FPV, you're also going to learn some stuff about what's going on, not just what the FPV Freedom Coalition does, but also just in general, what's going on with FPV regulations and how you can comply or know which ways you're not complying, depending on your perspective on it. Thank you, Dave Messina, my guest today. Dave, welcome to my YouTube channel. I always want to say welcome to the show as if I've got like a TV show. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Joshua.
So why don't we start, Dave, by just telling us who is the FPV Freedom Coalition and who are you with regards to the FPV Freedom Coalition?
Okay, the FPVFC is a nonprofit, non-stock corporation, and it's we're responsible for advocating for FPV flyers and advocating for their rights with the FAA. So that's limited to the United States. And we take two roles. One is to provide value and education because we're a 501c3, and we also work behind the scenes a lot with the FAA to advocate for our flyers' rights.
So a lot of people, when they think about advocacy organizations as relates to RC flying, think about the AMA. They're sort of an obvious big, they're kind of the only, some people would say. How would you compare the FPV Freedom Coalition to the AMA?
Well, you're right. The AMA is huge. It's 195,000 members, also structured in the United States. We're working with them. We have contacted their Director of Governmental Affairs, and we have an agreement that we'll work together where things are, where we coincide. Stated evenly, the AMA from headquarters wants to embrace FPV and all drone operators in the United States. If you go around to club fields, I think you'll find that there's a bigger focus from the AMA on fixed wing, radio-controlled model aircraft, and a less of a focus. So the difference is we're new. We're not 80 or some odd years old. We're small. They're very large. And the focus we have is focused on FPV flyers, and their focus is for all model aircraft, exclusively recreational.
Yeah, I think if we sort of get back to the, how old is the FPV Freedom Coalition? When were you founded?
We were founded in December of 2018, and we got our 501c3 in February of 2019. So we're brand new. Pretty
new. And if a lot of people think about the relationship of the AMA to FPV specifically and multi-rotors, I think there's definitely a sense, and I think there's some truth to it, that the AMA, well, let's just say charitably that it's a big ship and it takes a long time to turn, and they've focused on their core constituency of fixed wing flyers flying at traditional flight fields. And it seems like they're definitely trying to go, oh, they're the FPV thing, maybe we just can't ignore them. But I think the FPV Freedom Coalition seems to have been founded almost as a response to the ways in which the FPV community felt let down by the AMA. Would you agree with that?
I think a good way to look at it is the focus of where you fly. And so the AMA flyers fly at fields, and they're designated fields. And the AMA has been very successful in gaining, used to be a waiver, and now it looks like regulations that are designed for a fixed designated site. That's an anathema to us as FPV flyers. So our focus is we'd like to fly everywhere, and we don't want to be limited to a fixed site. So I think that focus is permeating their actions. And that's fine, because that is, as you say, that is helping the rights of most of the 195,000 members that they have.
Yeah. And I, as much as some people in the FPV community like to hate on the AMA, I personally am an AMA member. I mean, if you're an AMA member just because you want the insurance to go to events like Rotor Riot, Rampage, and International Open, then that alone makes it worth it. But I mean, there's such a big body that you can't just pretend they don't exist. They have too much pull. At the same time, most of their constituents are more traditional flyers. And so when they go to lobby, when they go to talk to Congress people and senators and whoever, that's the mindset they come from. And I was glad to see that the FPV Freedom Coalition was founded by, I mean, who are the founders? They are FPV people, aren't they? Not just you, but who else is involved?
Well, on the officers are Josh Cook, as vice president, and the other individual is Dan Oakes, and it's really the three of us who are running day-to-day operations. And then on the board is Josh, Chad Capper, definitely also the CEO and the founder of FPVFC, and also Jeff Thompson, and I'm a board member as well, and the president of FPVFC. So the way we structure it is, Josh, Dan, and I are responsible for day-to-day operations, and we get some guidance from Chad and Jeff, and also the board, which is also, Josh and I are part of that as well, so we're setting the direction of the company as well.
So let's talk about some of the things that the FPV Freedom Coalition is doing, because to me, where the rubber meets the road, that's where it really matters. What kind of things are you doing to help, I guess, protect the rights and lobby for, and I don't know, what are you doing for FPV enthusiasts?
Well, I'm really excited about this, and a fair amount of it is behind the scenes, and it is working with a federal government agency, so it is about as exciting day to day as watching paint dry. Yeah. But I went to a drone advisory committee on June 6th. That was down in Arlington, Virginia. And because things move slowly, the FAA has still not published the minutes to that meeting. But one of the things that was came out of that meeting was they set up a remote identification subgroup, and I've been able to volunteer to be on that subgroup. Now, and then that has split off to two areas. One is on incentives, and the other is on equipage. Now, the idea here is that the FAA has stated publicly that they anticipate that remote identification is about 2 years out. In the interim, from now to about 2 years from now, and this is a little hard to say, but they want FPV flyers and they want UAS flyers to voluntarily, I told you it was hard to say, to use remote ID. And so they were looking for a variety of ways to make this work, and then promote ways that it can function. So FPVFC is involved in what I would assert remote ID is the leading and most important regulation, because there are, as you know, many regulations that will build on remote ID, most importantly, unmanned traffic management.
So let's talk about, like, what is remote ID here for people who are hearing the term but maybe don't know what. I mean, we could all guess that. What does that mean? We're going to have a transponder on our drone. What does that mean? So obviously not settled. So a lot of this is to be determined. But the best way to get real depth on this is to look at two documents that are out there in the public domain. One is the UAS ARC, the UAS Aviation Rulemaking Committee document that was published in December 2018, and the second is the ASTM F38 document. The combination of, and that's a standards document relating to unmanned tracking and monitoring of vehicles. The combination of those two set down tiers of remote identification. So the first step is we have to register ourselves as recreational pilots. Then there's a notion of a tier 0, which says, oh, I don't have any equipment on this device that can allow me to transmit or identify remotely who or what I am.
So I have to get onto my phone and I tell through a Lance application that I need to fly. And that looks like that may happen. Then as you go to beyond visual line of sight, then you start to need some type of electronic communication with the system. So that could be something like Bluetooth or Wi-Fi in a smaller geographic area, and then you have to transmit non-personal information, which would be your identifier, your digital license plate, and your location. And so it's this type of staging that's what really starts to comprise remote ID.
I want to back up there because I think you may have you mentioned something that I think is really important to not overlook, and that is that, you know, when I first started hearing about remote identification, I thought, oh, great. I mean, the FAA wants to avoid collisions in the airspace. That's their main goal, I think, and they're concerned about quadcopters or whatever flying into planes. A lot of us sort of think that's a little ridiculous because we're flying in a park under the trees, but okay. And when I first started hearing about remote identification, I thought they are going to force us to put a transponder on our quad. It's going to be impossible for mini quads. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be a pain in the ass. And it's going to be completely unnecessary. And then I heard about that because of the lobbying efforts of organizations like the AMA and the FPV Freedom Coalition, that they were going to allow remote ID to basically, you just take out your smartphone and you say, I'm going to be flying below 200 feet in this park. And that counts as a remote ID. You don't need to have any additional gear on your quad. And I was like, oh my God, they finally did something that makes sense.
Right. So again, this is what we're talking about is that's codified in a standard that is almost finalized, and that's the ASTM F38. And it's also documented in the recommendations to the FAA in the UAS Aviation Rulemaking Committee that was the input into the 2018 Reauthorization Act for the FAA.
One of the things that I think I would like to get out of this interview is I hear from guys like you who are talking to and working with the FAA, and I hear about things that are coming down the pike. You know, the wheels of the government move so slowly that by the time the public hears about something like Part 107 or whatever, it's been in the works forever. And we're all like, where did this come from? What can we do about this? And it's like, it's too late. And I think a lot of people, there are other things like remote ID, like the Lance system, that are in the works that people might want to know about. Are there other things that are in the works that people are going to be surprised about 2 years from now that you know about because you're going to these meetings and you're paying attention?
Yes, emphatically.
So, what are they?
So I mean, one of the things that we talk about is drones are one of the safest hobbies in the world, and we know that through one of the guys that's working with us in FPVFC, Dean Schrober, did a Freedom of Information Act, and he was able to get that the number of confirmed incidents over the last 5 years is 14. The number of incidents described by the FAA is over the same time period, ending year-end 2018, was 7,458. So that discrepancy is such that, you know,
it's a pretty big discrepancy.
Wow. So one of the things that the FAA is now trying to do is in mid-November, they're going to put on a drone week. And so one of the things that they want to push is drones really are safe, because as you said, one of the two primary things that the FAA is about is safety. The other is security. And so they want to put forward the messaging of, let me describe to you how safe drones are. So that's something that, you know, I don't think anyone is aware of that. Mm-hmm. We've heard another item that is being worked on that we don't hear a lot about is the knowledge exam. So we all heard back in the Reauthorization Act, they said, oh, everyone who flies FPV or a drone is going to have to take some type of knowledge exam, recreational, regardless if you're 107 or not. Mm-hmm. The knowledge exam, there's a bit of a cloak of secrecy around it, and we're really not sure why. I've spoken to one of the individuals who is a district vice president in AMA, who sits on the board working with the FAA on the questions. He's pretty sure that the questions are set, and now it's a matter of how do we roll them out. And so that's frustrating because we were supposed to contribute to the questions. So we're not a shill for the FAA. We're not just blindly accepting everything the FAA says, but we're trying to, as soon as we can understand things like this, we make attempts to, can we help? Can we involve ourselves? Mm-hmm. So that's another one. Flying over people, and at night came out. That's happening. I'm trying to think what else is also happening that will be significant. Those are some of the ones that come to mind immediately.
Yeah, I think of like the questions that are in the Part 107 test, and a lot of people who are watching this may have taken their Part 107. A lot of them haven't, but as I read those questions for the first time, I was shocked at how sort of out of touch with the FPV community the FAA seemed to be. There were questions. It seemed like they all think that UASs are just small airplanes. And they talk about things like, you make sure you remove frost from the wings of your aircraft before you fly. And I'm like, you mean after I took it out of my backpack? and it really struck me how much good could come from having the voice of an actual like FPV pilot in some of these meetings. There
are two things, two comments there. One is, I am so grateful that the FAA is listening to UAS drone pilots and even commercial drone companies in comparison to what happened in Canada. In Canada, they have taken the full-scale regulations and simply dropped them onto drones, and so it's really painful to fly in Canada right now. The FAA, up through Elaine Chao, is taking the view that we really want to be able to innovate in the United States. This is a key area of innovation, and we have to allow this type of flight to happen. So I completely agree that when you look at the 107 exam, you go, really? It makes you wonder. And so, look at the composition of the Drone Advisory Committee, the group that provides industry, education, law enforcement input to the FAA. 35 seats, 32 of them are industry and education. So the recreational drones are 1.3 million drones, commercial are 280,000 this year. So we certainly deserve a seat at the table. We're not there yet, but we keep pushing with things like FPVFC, and we're getting there. And so we haven't won, but I am optimistic in comparison to where the U.S. is in comparison to other parts of the world.
I think, as the AMA seems to have learned, anytime you think you've won and you're safe, you're already in trouble. I think there was a time not too many years ago where the AMA thought they could ignore all this, and they had their little exemption, and as long as you were flying in an AMA field, you're fine, and they thought they didn't really have to think about this too much. And that's
correct. Yeah, it was the 2016 reauthorization that the AMA worked directly with Congress, and they were granted a waiver, and a model was not an aircraft. And then the 2018 reauthorization, Congress said, okay, all model aircraft are aircraft, and they're under the control of the FAA. So
the AMA kind of freaked out.
Yes, they did. Yes.
What do you say to people who go, I mean, I think there's a pervasive attitude in FPV because of its kind of underground roots. And some would say that underground FPV is the true FPV. I'm not going to weigh in on that here in this video. But what do you say to people who say, I don't care what the FAA says, I'm just going to keep doing my thing, none of this really applies to me?
Over the last 2 weeks, I've had two people who I respect highly say almost the identical thing. Well, when these rules are set in place, if you violate them, you're breaking the law. You're going to be arrested. And so I also add to that an interesting comment from Angela Stubblefield. She's an FAA deputy administrator. On June 6th, she stood up and she was describing the number of arrests that they made around the Super Bowl. And one of the drone operators that they had arrested said, I read the your NOTAMs and the TFRs, but you never do anything about this. So enforcement is changing, and part of the enforcement that changed in the 2018 reauthorization is that local law enforcement can now ask for credentials and can start the enforcement process of reckless behavior. So that to me is the stick that says that, it's serious, and we are in FPVFC. We're really interested in addressing and talking to and helping those people who I want to fly legally. And so to those people who say the heck with the FAA, I'm afraid that there will be incidents that will get a lot of publicity. People will be arrested. There'll be some fines and jail time, and then folks will start to say, "Ooh, this really is that serious."
What you're making me think is, until recently, if you were to get some kind of action against yourself for what you did with your drone, it would be the FAA. An FAA investigator would investigate, and you would receive a fine directly from the FAA. But what it sounds like you're saying is that they are working to codify this stuff into law, to the point where your local beat cop could arrest you for doing something in the same way as if they arrest you for speeding or trespassing, at which point the manpower for enforcement is going to be a lot higher.
It will. And the practicality of it and how that rolls out, because you have to educate law enforcement. And so lots of details to be filled in. Yet if you search in the FAA UAS website, one of the programs they've got is LEAP, Law Enforcement Assistance Program. So one of the programs that the FAA is working on is educating law enforcement on what they can ask for, what are the bounds, and then how do they get help from the FAA if they have a complaint about a reckless drone pilot. So I think it's amplifying.
This is, I think, a big move because there are certain areas of law, like if a cop pulls you over for speeding, chances are he or she knows the law very well and is not going to misinterpret. There are other areas of law that are a little bit more gray, and if you are arrested for it, you may have to go to court to fight it. That's going to be very difficult. You may feel that you are in the right, and yet, at the end of the day, no matter how right you think you are, if a cop decides they're going to arrest you, they're going to arrest you. And then you can decide if you want to fight it. And as the FAA starts this outreach to try to sort of to tell police, hey, you can start enforcing these laws. They're going to start enforcing them to the best of their abilities, and that is something that we probably will end up running up against.
Right, and this is one of we're encouraging FPV pilots to carry a set of safety guidelines. FPVFC has a safety guidelines on the website. You can use ours until the FAA comes out with the official ones. You have to have your drone registered. You have to have it labeled with the FAA number on the drone, and then you have to fly under 400 feet. No, it can't interfere with manned aircraft. And so these are a couple of simple rules that we've put out in a simple set of bullets on the front cover of our website. So if you're like, well, I'd really like to be legal, what do I need to do? Yeah. It's right there. Plus you can click through to the guidelines. So there are, as an example, there are AMA fields where FAA or local law enforcement are showing up, and they can ask for, do you have, could you please show me your identification for your FAA? Could you please, what guidelines are you using? And just simple questions.
You're not joking. He's not joking either. I read about this on Facebook. I think the flight field was in San Diego.
And
they fly I've actually been to that field when I was in San Diego. They're surprisingly close to the airport, but they have a waiver and they're good. And one day they're just out there flying at their field, and an FAA guy shows up and says, "Hey, we'd like to check your quads. Do you have your identification number on your quads?" And some of those guys were like, "What identification number?" So,
yeah. And I thought the FAA's response to how they handled it, they shut the field down for 1 hour, and the response of the club was equally professional. They immediately said, "We'll fix this. Well, everyone's going to be registered. We're going to have identification on every one of these model aircraft." And I thought that was prudent. Now, some might say, "Oh, you capitulated to the government." This is the law right now, and so I think on both sides it was reasonable and professional.
And I think that everybody has to decide where they want to be on this issue, because there are people out there who are going to say, just screw the government, I'm never going to comply, and they want to take that rebellious stance. There's a place for that kind of expression. We'll call it expression. We live in America. Freedom of expression is a thing. Disagreeing with the government is a valuable thing. And at the same time, other people are going to be like, that's not my fight. You want to put a registration number on my drone? Fine. For the people who want to know either what you need to do in order to be legal or what laws you're breaking if you decide not to be legal, we'll put a link to the FPV Freedom Coalition website where you've got that sort of cheat sheet about what you're currently expect, and that's ever changing too. So having a resource that keeps it up to date.
There's also the point, we've had a number of airline pilots contact us, and they ask us about how to stay legal, because they know right from the FAA, and they've verified this, if you have an infraction on a drone and you have a full-scale certificate license to fly an airplane, they will retract your full-scale license.
Wow.
So, if you fly for a living as a pilot, you take flying a drone very, very seriously. And so I'm not trying to fearmonger. It's been that awareness has been raised to us from pilots, and I think it's a good thing to keep in mind.
I think this is something I hope that people take from this interview, which is it goes back to what I mentioned before about what kind of things are coming down the pike. Whether you agree or disagree, it's like, you're in Indiana Jones and the boulder is rolling down the hill at you, right? I remember that scene? Except it's a really big boulder and it's moving really slowly, but it's coming. And I think if people had more awareness of the things that were going on, you cannot like them or you can like them, but they are happening. And if you put your head in the sand, the boulder is just going to roll right over you. And that's why I'm happy to have you here and you out there, because I don't want to go to those meetings. That sounds really boring. So I'm happy to have somebody else to do that for me and let me know what's coming and what's going on. So another thing that I read about on the FPV Freedom Coalition website is you guys are doing something with drone insurance. And I wanted to hear more about that because, I tried to get insurance for my stuff through just my normal home insurance provider. And they were just like, sorry, we don't insure drones. And I know that AMA has an insurance policy, but I always got the impression that if I'm just flying at the field, it might not cover me. So you've got some kind of deal with an insurance company specifically for FPV pilots. Is that right?
Yeah, we do. And so what we've done is it's a cross endorsement, so no money changing hands, and the company is Skywatch. And so skywatch.com, and they offer on-demand insurance or monthly insurance. And if you keep using it and don't have a claim, it increases a discount up to 50%. So some interesting things. Josh Cook and I drove this project, and we did a lot of research about a variety of insurance companies across the country. So if you look at, as well as what does the AMA provide, for their members, and one of the things we learned is there is an organization that creates underwriting for the second-tier insurance companies. And so if you have homeowners insurance, that chances are that just as you said, you're not covered if you're going to fly your drone around your home anymore. And this is usually for liability, so it's personal and bodily injury. So not covered. So if I fly around my house, and I want to be insured, I'm not covered if I'm going to fly this thing. Got it. Then we said, all right, well, what does the AMA offer? There is the secondary insurance. And again, this is, much like the regulations, it's sort of like, oh my gosh, this is so boring. But
it's a big deal, because
important.
I hear people out there saying, oh, my homeowners covers me, or, oh, I've got this policy, it's $6 a month and I'm good for and I'm like,
right.
You better go read that
fast.
policy, because you probably don't have the coverage you think you do. And you
Right.
don't want to find that out after you've got a $1 million claim.
Right. And so the AMA insurance is secondary insurance. So that insurance looks to your homeowner's insurance to act as the primary insurance, and then there'll be a rider or a cap on top of that. In addition, the AMA insurance does not cover any event where there's any prize money. So if you're in an FPV race, and if it's merchandise, or monetary prize, the AMA insurance does not cover you for that. So we felt that to be relevant to FPV community, we would articulate what's the state of insurance, one, and then two, we found a company that is interested in FPV flyers. They provide insurance for both recreational as well as commercial, and that's hobbyist and including racing. So as I say, it is, you can get on a smartphone and on demand, and you're insured.
Yeah,
so,
and we'll put a link to that as well, since I know some people are going to be curious about it. We'll put a link. That's Skywatch AI if you want to go check that out and see if that would be sort of appropriate for your needs. So that's pretty cool. One
of the things that we did mention it briefly was that we're continuing to talk with the AMA Governmental Affairs Group, and so. Big organization, and it's positive in the sense that I'm like you. I'm an AMA member. I'm an officer of a local club, and so we are trying to do everything we can to work and identify the AMA members who are involved in FAA projects and get involved and participate in the FAA activities that way as well. So just another thing that we're doing to try to integrate ourselves into FAA actions. I mentioned we're also doing town halls, and so one of the ways that as I said, we think we're doing a pretty good job on the FAA side of things. We need to improve on get the word out, and we really appreciate this interview. And every other week we have a town hall, and we're probably going to turn those into podcasts. And so this is a way to listen to the FPV community as well as provide information in a near real-time basis.
One of the questions that I know is going to come up when people watch this video is the relationship between FPV Freedom Coalition and Chad Kapper, who is the founder of Rotor Riot, and Jeff Thompson, who is the owner of Red Cat. Those relationships raise some flags in people's mind, especially the relationship with Red Cat, who many people feel is pro-regulation and in fact is, well, anyway, I won't speak for them. But so what was the relationship between these? And basically the gist of the question is, how can people be sure that FPV Freedom Coalition is really working for them and not working for, I don't know, Chad Kapper and Jeff Thompson?
Well, the easiest way is to talk to us and sign into our town halls and ask us questions. The way the structure works is that Jeff Thompson and Chad Kapper are on the board. So the other two members of the board are Josh Cook and me. And so the board is responsible for providing guidance to the officers of the company, and the officers of the company are Josh and me. And so I would guarantee you that the guidance that we get from Jeff Thompson and Chad is minimal. We are capable, and we are operating on our own. And I can tell you that the latest feedback that we've gotten from Chad Kapper, as the CEO and a board member, is fantastic, great job. So we're not falling out of line with the guidance, and so it is also important that I mentioned that the FPVFC is a 501c3. It is a non-stock corporation. So there is no ownership in a not-for-profit, and so none of the board members own any part of FPVFC. So this is what we will get our nonprofit status renewed or revoked based on how well we do to help the community. That's the metric. It's not a business metric.
You're saying you're beholden to the IRS first and foremost,
Absolutely.
which I think they're probably going to be a harsher judge than.
There's a lot of documentation for a 990, 990N. The documentation burden is significant. And as what we didn't mention is that why did we become a 501c3? It's because the FAA wants a community-based organization to be a 501c3.
Well, let's talk about the CBO, because I think that's something we overlooked and is important. What is a CBO, community-based organization, and why is it relevant that the FPV Freedom Coalition wants to be treated as a CBO by the FAA?
In addition to the Drone Advisory Committee, the FAA receives and wants to receive input from a community-based organization. And so this will give them a fewer number of people to work with representing the constituency or population of users. And so the CBO, as I said, has to be a 501c3. And one of the clever stipulations of a 501c3 is you can only spend a minimum amount of energy lobbying Congress. So this encourages and enforces the CBO to work with the FAA, not Congress. The other piece is that the FAA wants the CBO to provide the knowledge exam, to administer it, as well as input questions to it. And they want the CBO to be very involved in the safety guidelines, educating users on it, creating a set of guidelines. And so very much of the communication outward and broadcast, that's a big role of the CBO. And that's certainly one of the things that we're trying to do. So it's important to note that as of today, the FAA has not defined the criteria of a CBO. So the AMA is not yet a CBO, nor is the FPVFC. We are waiting for the criteria, and we will seek the ability to become a CBO, and we're optimistic that, given the work we're doing, that hopefully we'll be granted CBO status.
When I first heard about the FPV Freedom Coalition, that's the part that I think I was actually most excited about, because if you go back to, I think it was 336, Section 336, the FAA carved out a special role for a CBO. And they basically said, if you are flying under the safety guidelines of a CBO, you basically can ignore all this nonsense. And that was the AMA. The AMA was basically the only CBO in existence. And I was like, well, that's fine, but those safety guidelines don't really fit what we do. The idea, and by the way, that special exception has now been removed.
Repealed.
But the idea that there is a CBO out there specifically focused on the FPV community makes me feel good, because whatever special role CBOs have to the FAA, I want there to be one for me. And it sounds like that's what the FPV Freedom Coalition wants to be at the end of the day.
It is. And I'm not coming across any other group or organization that is trying to do the same thing that we are. It's a reasonably high hurdle to become an incorporated corporation and then get your 501c3 approval from the IRS. So to me, also, that was clever as well from the FAA. Set a bar.
So you can't just, anybody can't just walk out there and go, oh yeah, I'm a CBO. My name's Bob CBO. Yeah, no, I was involved with an organization that got their 501c3, and it is very, very difficult. The IRS has very high standards because when you're a 501c3, then you don't have to pay taxes anymore, and they don't like that. So
that's correct. Yeah. What are they getting in return? And that's we're helping the community. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I guess the way I would close the interview is to say, I mean, do people become members of the FPVFC? Do they pay you a dues? How can people join /support /participate in the FPV Freedom Coalition?
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask to mention that we have members. There is it's easy on the website. We've got buttons that take you over to another website, and we're very interested in asking folks to become members. Adult membership is currently $40 a year. We may change that, but right now that's what it is, and we would welcome the support. What we're using those funds for are strictly operations. So it's IT and travel. And so right now, none of us are taking any salary. You can, with a nonprofit, take a salary, but it's all volunteer, as is the travel that I've taken down to DC was on my dime. So we would very much appreciate folks becoming members of FPVFC.
And when you say travel, I mean, we're not talking about, going to Florida for a conference. You're talking about, I mean, the biggest challenge, you can write a million emails and serve and letters and so forth, but having a face in front of an FAA rep at a hearing or a meeting, having you in the room, that is 1,000 times more useful.
There is no replacement for being there. I would, yep. And so here we are. It's August. June 6th was the Drone Advisory Committee meeting. They've not yet been able to get the minutes out. By being there, I was able to get involved with the Drone Advisory Committee and the subgroups, and I'm starting a relationship. So I absolutely agree. No replacement for being there face to face.
I have one more question for you that it was in my head earlier in the interview, then we moved past it, and I don't want to end the interview on a down note, but I do feel it's an important question. What do you say to people who, I think that some people have kind of given up and said, look, the Amazons and Googles and the UPSs of the world are clearly going to get their way. We are all screwed. We're just going to get the crumbs off the table, if that. So what's the point of all this action? It's not going to have any effect. What do you think about that? What do you say to that?
I say the AMA, with 195,000 members, is a significant lobbying force in the Congress. They are known to our congressmen and senators. We have 1.3 million recreational drones in the United States. So does that equate to number of users? Split it in half. It's 650,000. So the numbers that we have are able to get us visibility, and we will be able to make a difference in the FAA with Congress, just simply because of the numbers that we have. This is a sufficiently popular hobby, and right up, as I mentioned, right up from the top of the Department of Transportation, from Elaine Chow, she is very interested in furthering the innovation that we have. And to me, the tip of the spear of innovation is in FPV, with all the amazing coding and hardware work that's going on.
Awesome. Well, I guess that wasn't that was actually a very hopeful note. So good. All right. Well, Dave Messina, thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us. There are links to all of the stuff that we talked about in the interview down in the video description below. You can go check those out. I guess that's going to do it. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Joshua.